and I'm standing in Boston Common. Boston Common is a park in downtown Boston, founded in 1634. This is Parkman Plaza, dedicated to the memory of George E. Parkman, 1823 to 1908. And here in the plaza are statues representing industry, religion, and learning. This is industry. And this is the bronze of religion. One of the three statues here in Boston Common. We're getting ready to take a guided tour along the road to freedom, the Freedom Trail, a 2.5 mile tour through Boston, a walking tour by the famous buildings that we all know from history. This is a statue dedicated to learning. See here, carved in the granite.
This is what Boston looked like in 1630. Right now, we're standing right about where the tip of my finger is. 2 square miles. Today's over 52 square miles. Tremont Street, directly behind you, meaning 3 hills. The very top of that gold dome was the original height. That was cut down, and now fills in this area right here between the north end and the west end of Boston. This down here, Boston Neck, is today Washington Street. And this neck was so narrow when they docked the ships on both sides, there's spars that almost touch. So low tide, the spars that hang over the neck, no horse and buggy can get by. They had traffic then, we have more traffic today. So, really doesn't change. And I tell people I've been transported. I'm not a reenactor per se, so I'm not gonna, talk old English, even though people think I do talk. So I know who the president is, I know what a cell phone is. I had a kid said the other day, he says, "You got a cell phone? Did they have a cell phone back then?" I goes, "Oh." I said, "But when I was growing up," I said, "our phones had tails on them and they were stuck to the wall." It was just a while ago. And what people said, what do you do? Keep them uneducated. So one of the first public laws they passed here in Massachusetts was to start schools. Not just for their children, but for the next generation, next generation, next generation. So they can tell what is right and wrong, and they have the education to know who to follow, what to follow. As they started reading the Bible, they realized the king does not give me my rights. The king gives my rights. He can take them away anytime he wants. They're God-given rights. And I'll give my life, my property, my sacred honor, that my children's children will have the same freedom. That's why we celebrate the most stable, single constitution in world history for over 200 years. Now, it doesn't make us a perfect country. We don't claim to be one. And no matter how many people say how bad this country is, it's still 10,000 times greater than other countries. The reason is the liberty. And to give you an example of liberty, you can take sheep and you can take a wolf. Now the sheep want their liberty not to be eaten by the wolf. And the wolf, being the king at that time, wants his liberty to eat the sheep. So you have to put up a defense. And when people realize their rights are not from God, they're not from the king, they're from God, that's when they pledge to life. If you didn't know your rights from anybody else but the king, there's no sense fighting. You only fought when the king told you to go to war. But when they got here, it's a reason. First time in world history that we own our own property. Well, today we're renting. But originally, you have your own property. That you could send your children to schools. Old England, only the wealthy went to schools. So as we go along, we'll show you these graveyards of the people who stood and gave their lives, their property, and their sacred honor. What's interesting, all the research I do, I never find a book or a pamphlet where these men and women complain that others got their freedom, and they never got paid back of all the money they gave in their lives and their property. Never complained. Even Ben Franklin, when his son became a loyalist, went back to Europe, he disowned his own son. He wouldn't even talk to him, because at that time he was a patriot. He becomes a loyalist, and your word was your honor. That's all you have, is your word. And when the people don't keep their word, their honor is no good. We're running around here saying taxation without representation is tyranny, which it is. The tyrant who controls our purse strings controls our future. They realize that. And that's when they pledge their lives, their property, and their sacred honor. So when Ben Franklin's son becomes a loyalist, he wouldn't talk about it. Ben Franklin says it's not the tax we had a revolution. It's the king violated his own laws. It's the principle that we had a revolution. Now keep in mind, we called it a war for independence. We're all British. Oh, nothing different. We're all British at that time. And the king called it a revolution. We call it a war for independence. And it just didn't happen. It took time. And as we go along, I'll point out the, certain times and dates and the graveyards and stuff as we go through. But they settled here. The Puritan Pilgrims, out of the same stock. But the Pilgrims believed that the Church of England was so corrupt there's nothing they could do for them. So they became known as separatists. Now the Pilgrims didn't come here for religious freedom. Contrary. They already had their freedom in the Netherlands. They lived there for 12 years. It was a country of freedom. And they were afraid that Spain was going to conquer the Netherlands, so they came here to have the sole authority to be God, not man, as the statutes I pointed out earlier. Statutes dedicated religion, education, and industry, unheard of in world history. Everything was owned by the king of the time, the Lord of your neighbor. And the Puritans believed the Church of England was corrupt, but they wanted to stay within the church and change it around, so they got the nickname Puritans. Actually, it was a swear word. It meant two things. You were against the king and you were against the Church of England. They were neither. So even today, when you get in an argument with somebody, and generally it's about religion and politics. That's actually all it's all about. It's either politics or religion. And they're losing the argument. What did they do? Ah, you're puritanical, and walk away. It's like swearing at them. Even back then, when they called you a Puritan, they go, Puritan, and walk away. But it's what they believed in, what's made this country great. And they settled north of Boston, Cape Ann, moved down to Salem, and then they lived down in Charlestown, which is across the bay, which is on the top of this map. And the first settler in Boston was Reverend William Blackstone of Blackstone. He lived here to Native Americans from 1624. He invited the Puritans over in 1630. And two main reasons they came across the bay to live in Boston. Boston at high tide almost became an island. So there was no better way to protect yourself than be surrounded by water. The other reason they came across the bay is Boston was known as Shum, meaning living waters. There were 3 freshwater springs, as a Native American word at that time, and the 3 freshwater springs where the other towns had brackish water. Anybody know what brackish water is? Salt, freshwater mixed, they could get sick and even die from drinking. And contrary to belief, they weren't teetotalers. They drank more beer back then than we do today. They would feed their children little pigs. Of course, it had less alcohol content than it does today, but it's because of the brackish water. And the beginning of Massachusetts' economy was the codfish. So abundant with codfish, that's where we get the name Cape Cod. And in 1798, we opened a new state house. By the way, it was designed by Charles Bulfinch. He also designed the capital of Washington, D.C. About 1/3 of the state capitals in this country got taken from this design. Now that's pure leaf gold on top, valued over $1 million. Originally was a wooden dome. Paul Revere and Son put a copper sheeting around it. And one time it was painted black on the wall so the Indian would not use it as a target. So we opened the front doors in 1798, and at that time we commissioned a codfish to be carved out of one piece of pine. It's 5 feet in length, and it still hangs in the balcony of the House of Representatives by 2 wires. And the day they transferred it up to the new State House, the politicians carrying the sacred codfish had to wear new clothes. They had to wear new white gloves. They wrapped the sacred codfish up in newspaper and had a parade. Now the symbol of the sacred codfish, not the superstition. They knew in 1795 the sacred codfish, our economy, does not belong on a politician's desk. They don't own it. It's us, the people, that make up the economy. And the reason a sacred codfish hangs with 2 wires above the head at all times is a reminder representatives sitting below it that the economy, like the fish, is supposed to swim freely. And the reason the politicians wore new clothes that day, new white gloves, and wrapped the sacred codfish up in newspaper, they knew they're not supposed to touch the economy. So I think today we need a holy mackerel. Now Woodrow Wilson, if you like him or dislike him, great historian, he said if a nation forgets where it came from, the nation does not know what it is today, nor does it know where it's going. So I'm happy you're taking my tour because I know the way. The other's the second best one. Any questions? None? Okay. We know this is a granary, unusual name for a graveyard. But down here to my right where the church is, originally was an old warehouse that stored grain. So it got the name granary. Now, at one time you could have someone buried here if you had a family member buried here. That's no longer true today. But what's interesting, if you look up here to my right, or anywhere actually, not everywhere, but look up here to my right, mostly in the sunlight. Compare these gravestones with gravestones in your town. What's the difference? It's always on the west side of the stones. There's no writing on this side. This is the east side of the gravestone. Now this is true in the old graveyards in New England. Now remember, the Puritans believe in life after death. They believe they have God-given rights. And they believe when they die, they want to see God. So they're all buried with their feet facing the east. So the day of the last judgment, they be facing the rising. And that's true in the old graveyards in New England. And if you have old graveyards in your town, please check them out and see. It has to be the older graveyards, as they are here. Now, we have 3 Connecticut governors that are buried here. Not 3 signers of the Declaration of Independence: James Otis, Paul Revere, his 2 wives, 16 children. And over to my left is the grave. The largest stone is Sam Adams. The thinnest stone here to my left is the 5 men died at the Boston Massacre. Now they say, you know, our revolution, or war for independence, keep in mind we call it war for independence, as they came to call it a revolution. Ben Franklin's parents are buried in the center. Ben Franklin, by the way, is buried in Philadelphia with his wife Martha. He went there around 1723 to the most of his adult life in Philly. And Sam Adams, born in Boston, went to Harvard University. And when I mention his name, what's the first thing you think about? A little trivia for you. Not a trick question. Whose picture is on a bottle of Sam Adams beer? And it's not Sam Adams. It's Paul Revere. It's taken from a painting of the Museum of Fine Arts. They enhanced it. But it's Paul Revere on a Sam Adams beer. Go figure. Well, Sam Adams did own a brewery when he was a youngster. He inherited it from his uncle. He was very bad with finances. He went bankrupt in 4 months. He was so bad in finances that his wife would write in history that she took care of the finances because Sam would give all the money to the revolution. Now you can go across the street to the Beantown pub and have a cold Sam Adams. Look out that window across the street at a cold They get better than you. So when I mention his name, Sam Adams, he's the one that coined the word Boston Massacre. If you read the dictionary today, massacre means a lot of people have died. Only 5 people have died. 8 were injured. But it was to draw a picture, a mental picture in people's minds. Wake up. You're losing your freedoms. Little by little, the taxes without representation. 2 weeks prior to the Boston Massacre, they killed a 12-year-old boy. 2 weeks after that, they killed 5 unarmed men. That's what unites everybody together. But Sam Adams, he went to Harvard University. His parents were very wealthy. His father went bankrupt. He went to Harvard to be a minister. Sam ends up being a lawyer. He wasn't a very good lawyer, but he was able to support his family. And he coined the word Boston Massacre. It's a propaganda word. It's just to draw that picture in people's mind. Propaganda is not a bad word. It's like World War II. And he also said, on his commencement, every time there's a commencement speech and they graduated from Harvard, the royal governor goes to listen to these commencement speeches. And he went to listen to Sam Adams' commencement speech. And he said during his commencement speech, we have a right by British common law to protest against the king's laws. That's when the royal governor of Massachusetts leaned over and he goes, I think we're going to have trouble with this. Even Sam Adams at one time. Now keep in mind, who would fight for 3 pennies? Who would actually spill their blood for 3 pennies? Founding fathers. They knew what 3 pennies were. Sam Adams says, why should we pay that 3-cent tax? God forbid. They want to tax our food. They might want to tax our property. They might want to tax our clothes. That's over 300 years ago. So when they pledged their lives, their property, and sacred honor, that was their word. If they didn't keep their word, they didn't associate. Even the royal governor of Massachusetts, Thomas Hutchinson, was so despised, they would not even stand in the shadows of him. That he cast a shadow. Because he was born in Boston. He becomes a loyalist, they become patriots. Even Ben Franklin disowns his own son. Just becomes a loyalist. So Sam Adams coined the word, and they say there's 4 ingredients for lawful resistance against the king's laws, or any laws for that matter. And you'll find them in this graveyard. The first being Sam Adams. He was a great writer. He wasn't a great speaker. You don't hear too many of his lectures, but he would write and write and write and write. So much so the king sent word over. He said, I'll give everybody a pardon except for 2 people. Sam Adams and his best friend John Hancock. If you catch them 2, instantly cut the head. Take the head, put it on the stake, put the head, the stake on the top of Beacon Hill, so everybody can look up and see what's going to happen to their kings if they don't obey the king's orders. So they realized they had a lot to lose. This was just not a pie in the sky thing. They pledged everything. They kept their word. So much so when Sam Adams passed away, he asked his daughter to tell an inspirational story that she could tell about her father would inspire others. And she said, I can tell you the story about my father when he was invited the night to the royal governor's house for dinner. Everybody in Boston said, don't go, Sam. It's a trick. They're going to hang you for treason. And he said he had to go to find out what they could do or not do. And his daughter says, well, they're having dinner. At the end of dinner, the royal governor says, listen, I just got word from the king, and the king told me to stop all your rebel rousing. And if you do that, Sam, he'll give you anything you want. All the gold and silver. You can buy a big mansion for your wife. You can buy clothes for her every day. You can put shoes on your children's feet. Just make peace with the King of England. Just my father listened to him very politely, pushed himself away from the table, stood up, crossed his arms, looked at the royal governor, and he said, you can tell a king of England that I made peace with the King of Kings, meaning God, and stop harassing God-fearing people who walked up. She goes, that's my father. That's what he stood. He was a man of fame. He wasn't a man of wealth. He wasn't a man who wanted big houses, big men. He wanted his independence as a British subject. That was my father. That's what sticks in her heart. And she remembers my father.
How come there's writing on the side of this side of the grave?
Now everybody enjoying themselves?
Yeah.
This is yes. No. Now this would be the second ingredient for lawful resistance against the king's laws. This is James Otis, 25 years old. He's the prosecutor for the royal governor of Massachusetts. And what we'll do is we'll step in this little alcove so when people come by, they can take pictures and we won't be entertained. The second ingredient for lawful resistance against the king's laws, he was a speaker. James Otis was the writer. James Otis was a speaker. He was the talker. They said he talked so well that he could sway a crowd into the revolution, to pick up their guns. And keep in mind, most of these people never seen battle. A lot of them didn't even own weapons, but they knew what liberty was. And he was a prosecutor for the royal governor of Massachusetts at the age of 25, and he prosecuted most of these people who had smuggled goods into Boston and wouldn't pay for the tariff or the tax on them at that time. He realizes, gee, he wakes up and he realizes, gee, we're all British, we are losing our freedoms. He quits his own job as the prosecutor of the royal governor. So he wasn't a hypocrite in that sense. And he was asked to argue against the writ of assistance. Anybody know what the writ of assistance is? Illegal search and seizure. Today you need a warrant. Even our law systems haven't changed that much since they founded it. Today you still have right by trial by jury, appointed lawyer. You know, these laws have been amended, but they have, I mean, it's basically the same, still the same. But he argues against the writ of assistance for 4 hours. They said he spoke so well that not one person would move a muscle. It's a lot of talking. And he lost that debate, but sitting in the audience was a young attorney. He was 23 years old and he was taking notes. His name, John Adams. And he said the day that James Otis spoke is the day that child independence was born. John Adams gives James Otis the credit for our revolution. That's 15 years before the Stamp Act, before our revolution even started. That he spoke so well. And I guess a lot of people consider him intolerable because they didn't like what he was saying. And one night he walked into the British coffee house and the British soldiers snuffed out the candlelight and gave James Otis such a vicious beating. They beat him over the head with an object that damaged his brain. And over the years it'd slowly go insane. They said one day he'd be talking to you normal, and the next minute he'd be babbling down the street. And he was up in Andover, Massachusetts on a cloudy day, living up there. He would be right to his family, and he said the day he died, he wanted to die by a bolt of light. He just wanted to die instantly. And they say on a cloudy day, standing at the front door of his house, he was hit by a bolt of light. Killed instantly. Now historians say in 1 second, he was in the presence of God. Now his house is still there. And it wasn't damaged. It's still, the house is still there. He died. And I don't think that's theologically sound. But we had 9 feet of snow and I had to shovel out my little car and somebody else came along to put their little car in my place. I did pray for them. And, but he'd be the second ingredient, James Otis. Now the third ingredient, you need a financer. And that'd be John Hancock. We'll stand here because it's too much sunlight there and I don't want you wilting away on me. But this tall stone here to my right. Matter of fact, the gravestone for John Hancock and the gravestone for Ben Franklin's parents are fairly new. There were modest graves back then. John Hancock's grave was known as Tomb 16. It deteriorated, and Bostonians took up a fundraiser and we built these new stones for their graves. But John Hancock, wealthiest person in Boston. Anybody know how John Hancock earned his money? Inherited. His uncle owned everything. His parents, his father sent John to Harvard University, graduated Harvard University at the age of 17 as a lawyer. And they said he was a very good lawyer. His father passes away, he goes to live with his uncle. His uncle sees how smart he is, sends him to Europe, learn more about business, and his uncle passes away. John Hancock comes back. He's the wealthiest person in New England at that time. They said he was so wealthy, he would ride around the streets in Boston in 2 carriages. One was his personal carriage. The second one had 4 chests. Remember the old big chest of clothes. They said he would change his clothes every 4 hours. Now, I wish I could. That's why you keep a distance from me. When I take off this waistcoat, it stands up by itself. But he was asked to talk on the 4th anniversary of the Boston Massacre. And he reminded the people, sometimes you got to act, sometimes you got to pray, sometimes you got to fight, and sometimes you got to die. Freedom is not free. Someone paid for it. And when he pledged his life and his property, he had more to lose than anybody else. Even so, after the Battle of Lexington and Concord, we chased the British back into Boston. There was like 20,000 farmers and blacksmiths surrounding Boston, keeping the British inside Boston, that he found out that the British are going to use his mansion as their headquarters. So John Hancock and a couple of his friends, the other militia, sneak into Boston with 2 4-pound cannons, whereas the British had 16 and 24-pound howitzers, and he bombs his own house. But he had more to lose than anybody. Robert Morris, who gave $2 million. Now, even today, if you go out for a loan, think about this. You go for a loan, you need collateral. If you have no collateral, the bank's not giving you nothing. See you later. The same back then. We didn't get any financing from any other country for like first 3 years. Until France realizes, gee, hey, they could win this. We can make money off this. And so Robert Morris donates $2 million of his money. Not all, above what he had, but all he had. After the revolution, Robert Morris spent several years in debtor's prison, but you don't hear him complain. I gave everything to the revolution that you guys celebrate your freedom. I'm in debtor's prison and the government never paid him back. But their word was their honor. If they didn't keep the word, their honor was no good. That's the only thing left in a man or a woman's heart is their word. Ben Franklin disowns his own son because his word was no good. He's going to put the king in the throne. He's going to make us indentured servants. We want our liberty. For 5,000 years, even today, folks, people plow the fields with a stick. After 350 years of Pilgrims landing in Plymouth, we put a man on the moon. It's because of the liberty that you could use your mind, your heart, and the freedom to pass it to your children's children. Unheard of in world history. That makes us great. Does it make us arrogant? No. Does it make us perfect? No. We're still working on everything as everybody else. But these are testaments to what they believe in. It's like you're going to buy a house. You don't buy it without a foundation. This is the foundation of this country. You can't keep this country unless you keep the foundation. Woodrow Wilson said, if a nation forgets where it came from, it does not know what it is today, and it doesn't know where it's going. So, 3 ingredients so far. Sam Adams, the writer, James Otis, the speaker, John Hancock, the financer, and of course you need a messenger. He didn't have an iPhone back then. Paul Revere. We'll go up to his grave. Any questions, by the way? He was a silversmith, and pennies, by the way, are copper. He was a silversmith, goldsmith, a bell ringer, bell caster. He was a painter. He was a parodontist. 16 kids, you had to have all those jobs. Now I want to tell you more about Paul Revere when we get to his house in the North End. His home is still there, it dates back to 1680. He bought it in 1770. But 2 things I will tell you about Paul Revere that you might not know about. By 1770, they were buried 4 deep in these graveyards. Now that's prior to having these buildings and fences all around them. So when we have a rainstorm, the rain will wash the topsoils off the graves and the bones that stick to the ground. So Paul Revere got the law changed that people in Boston have to be buried 6 feet under. He also got the law changed that garbage has to be collected twice a week. I wish they'd go back to that.